Welcome to your review of place value. You have your review package with you. Remember to attempt each problem before checking the video to check your solution. Here we go. So the first question asks you to record the number in the place value chart. So remember, when we're starting with this, we need to remember to start with the decimal. That will orient us within the place value chart. So as you can see here, I'm going to put my decimal in the decimal place, okay, and follow along with the numbers. So I'm going to start with the number in front of the decimal, which is an 8, and it goes in the ones column. So I have 8, and when I see the decimal, I say the word and then I fill in the rest of the numbers. Next, it asks me to write the number 8.909 in expanded form. So I do this by starting off to the left of the decimal and recording that number, which we said was 8 ones. This number here. Next, I go to the right of the decimal, which was 9 tenths. And to write 9 tenths, it's 0.9. Okay, my next one, I have 0 hundredths, so I don't need to represent that by itself. So I move on to the thousandths and write 9 thousandths. Well, in expanded form, I write 9 thousandths as 0.009. 1C here says write 8.909 in fraction form. Remember, we do fraction form to help us when we want to write out in written form, or how we would say the number. So I take the 8 wholes, so 8 ones. Then I have my fraction of the decimal. So my decimal was 909. So I write that down, 909 thousandths. If you take a look at the place value chart here, it's thousandths. So if it's thousandths, I write it in a fraction over 1,000. So to say this number or put it in written form, my number is 8 and, which represents the decimal, 909 thousandths. Now remember, on your test, it's really important that you have the THS there. That shows us that this is in decimal form. Thousandths. Try the next question. Sorry, before I proceed to the next question, I've actually made a mistake here. Now remember, we use the word and to represent the decimal. So this would mean that this and right here is actually incorrect. You do not say 909 thousandths. You would just say 909 thousandths. You do not use the word and. Sorry for that mistake there. If you've done that as well, cross yours out. Okay, now we can move on. Okay, so this next question, 1E, asks us to round 8.909 to the nearest hundredth. My first job is to identify where the hundredth is. So which digit represents hundredths? Okay, so remember the first number there, the 8, is in the ones column. Then the decimal, then there's the 9, which is tenths. To the right of that one here, the 0 is the hundredth. So that is the number that could possibly be changing when I round. To figure out whether that number rounds up or stays the same, I look to the number of the right of the number that I'm concerned with. So to the right of the hundredths, which is a 9. Now a 9, because it's greater than 5, makes the hundredths digit go up from a 0 to a 1. So my new number is 8.91 because the 9 in the thousandths makes my hundredths go up. So 8.91. For F here, it says round 8.909 to the nearest tenth. So the number that I'm looking at that could possibly change is this first 9. Okay, remember when we're rounding, we look to the digit that is to the right. So I'm going to be looking at the 0. Is the 0 going to make that first 9 increase or stay the same? Well, 0 is less than 5. So the digit is actually going to stay the same. So my new number is 8.9. Now remember, you can put zeros after if you would like to, but you don't need to put zeros in afterwards. You could just finish it at the 10th there, 8.9. Okay, here we are with number 2. I am going to start off by saying that I did in fact make a typo here on the worksheet. Here, I meant this number here, this 12.2347, to be the same as the original number, 12.3457, but I see now that I've actually made that mistake. So I'm going to give you the answer for the number that is written here, but I do apologize if you followed the original number here. Okay, so that might change your answer a little bit. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing it asks you to do is put it in the place value chart. Okay, I orient myself to the decimal. Decimal goes there. I look to the left of the decimal to see what number is before it. I see a 12, so that means I have 1 in the tens column and a 2 in the ones column. Okay, then I just fill in the rest of my numbers here. So I have a 3 in the tenths, 4 hundredths, 5 thousandths, 7 ten thousandths. In expanded form, I take each place value and write it with an addition symbol in between. So I have my tenths place, my ones place, and then we continue along here. So my first one is 3/10, and I write that as 0.3. Then 4 hundredths, 0.04, 5 thousandths, 0.005, and 7 ten thousandths, 0.0007. Now my next question asks me to write it as a fraction. So I'm referring to this number that is here. Okay, so I have 12 wholes, and then I have 2,347 ten thousandths. So remember, I get my 10 thousandths by looking up here in the place value chart. Okay, 10 thousandths. Okay, my fraction here helps me say the number, or helps me when I want to put it in written form. So I start off with before the decimal and I have a 12. 12 and, which represents the decimal, 2,347 ten thousandths. So I'm just reading this fraction and writing down the words. 2,347 ten thousandths. Okay, now I'm looking down here, and it's asking me to round to the nearest thousandth. Okay, so if I look here, I need to determine which is the thousandth digit. So we start off at the decimal, the next one is tenths, then we have hundredths, okay, then we have thousandths. So the 4 here, and I apologize, it's really hard to circle the 4 when my screen is so small. So the 4 here is the one that could be changing. To figure out if it changes, I look to the next number, which is a 7. 7 is greater than 5, so that makes my 4 go up. So my new number is 12 and 235 thousandths. So this 5 here is the number that has changed because it is in the thousandths column. Okay, let's look here. My next question here, it says to the nearest hundredth. So I need to identify what number is in the hundredth place value. That is the 3. Again, I apologize, it's hard on this really small iPad screen. Okay, so the 3 is the one that could possibly be changing. I look to the right of it, which is the 4. Okay, is a 4 going to make that 3 change? No, 4 is less than 5. So therefore, my 3 stays the same. So now I have 12 and 23 hundredths. Here is number 3. So I take the number, put it into the place value chart. Start with the decimal. Okay, to the left of the decimal is 0. Okay, to the right I have a 7, a 3, and a 0, so I place those into the place value chart. In expanded form, I take each place value, stretch it out, so I have 7/10 and 3/100. I don't need to represent this 0 in my expanded form. Okay, to write it as a fraction, there are two options. You could either write this as 73/100, so 73 over 100, or if you wanted to include the 0 here, you would write it as 730 thousandths, because the 0 is in the thousandths column. Okay, again, I just read this as I read the fraction, 73/100 or 730 thousandths. Okay, here we go to round. It says round to the nearest tenth. Well, I know the 7 is in the tenths place, so I look to the right, which is a 3. A 3 is going to make the 7 stay the same. So my new number is 0.7 or 7/10. Next, I have 0.730, and we want to round it to the nearest hundredth. To do this, I look to the right of the hundredth, which is the 3, and I see a 0. A 0 is going to make the 3 stay the same, so therefore my new number is 73/100, or 0.73. Okay, number 4, we're moving on to whole numbers here. Okay, so I recorded in the place value chart. Now remember, when we're using whole numbers, it is easiest to start in the ones column and writing the number almost backwards. So I start with the 6, I plunk 6 ones in, I have 5 tens, 5 hundreds, and 4 thousands. Okay, in expanded form, I'm going to write each place value out. So, first one that I have is 4 thousands, then I have 5 hundreds, 50 tens, and 6 ones. Okay, I put an addition sign in between each one to symbolize that 4,556 is all of these numbers added together. Okay, for C it says write it in written form, so I do that by reading it out, 4,556. Okay, rounding. Here it says we need to round to the nearest thousand. So remember, I need to figure out what number is in that place value. So 1,000 is 4. I have 4,000. But I want to round, so I look to the number to the right, which is a 5. Is that 5 going to make my 1,000 go up or stay the same? Well, 5, if it's 5 or greater, we round up. So my new number is 5,000. Okay, for F here, we are rounding to the nearest 100. So now I look to the 100 digit, which is that 5 there. Okay, I look to the right of that 5, or the hundreds digit is another 5. Again, if it's a 5, it makes the number go up. So my new number is 4,600. It is this 6 that has changed. Here's my next number, 234,654. Okay, I put it into the place value, again starting backwards, the 4, 5, 6, 4, 3, 2. In expanded form, I've done this one a little bit differently. I've done it vertically. I couldn't quite fit in my 4 here, so I apologize. So I start with 200,000, then I have 30,000, 4,654. If I add all those together, that will get me my number here. Okay, in written form, I'm just reading it out. So I have 234,654. Okay, for rounding, we're rounding to the nearest 10,000. So what digit here is in the 10,000 place? Well, that's the 3. Okay, to figure out if it changes, I'm going to look to the number in the right, which is a 4. Well, I know my rounding rules, 4 is less than 5, so therefore my number will stay the same. So when I'm rounding to the nearest 10,000, my new number is 230,000. Okay, here, question F here, it's asking us to go to the nearest 100,000. So that means I'm looking at the very first number, this 2 here. Okay, to do that, I look next door. It's a 3. Is a 3 going to change it? Nope, it's going to stay the same. So my nearest 100,000 is 200,000. Number 6. Record the number 1,353,534 into the place value chart. So again, I like to start with the ones and write it backwards. 4, 3, 5, 3, 5, 3, 1. Okay, to put it into expanded form, I'm going to take each place value and write it out. So I know that I have 1,300,000, 50,000, 3,000, 500, 30, and 4. Okay, remember that addition symbol there. Okay, in written form, 1,353,534. Rounding, we want to round to the nearest 100, so let's take a look. What is in the 100th digit? That's the 5. I look to the right of it, which is a 3. Does the 3 make it go up or stay the same? It stays the same. So I have 1,353,500. Okay, over here we're rounding to the nearest 1,000. So what number is in the thousands digit? It is this 3 over here. Okay, look next door. Next door is a 5, so it's actually going to round up. So my new number is 1,354,000. Here's our last set of questions here. Okay, so the first set here, number 7, we are comparing and ordering decimals. Well, we're comparing in these cases using the greater, less than, or equal sign. Now remember, we want our mouth to be eating the greater value. So let's take a look. What is the greater value? 3 4/10 or 3 6/10? Well, I know 6/10 are larger than 4/10, so therefore my mouth is eating towards the 3 6/10. Okay, for B here, I have 4 26/100, or I have 4 56/100. Okay, well, if I had 100 squares and 56 of them are colored versus 26, obviously 4 56/100 is going to be the larger value. Okay, let's take a look at this next one. It is a little bit tricky. We have a 4 2/10, and then we have a 4 20/100. Remember, this extra 0 here doesn't add any value. This number actually still says 4 2/10. We have a 2 in the tenths column. So these are actually equivalent decimals. So we're going to write an equals sign there. Because remember, we could always write this as 2/10, or it's the same as saying 20/100. Remember, whatever I do to the bottom of my fraction, I've added a 0 here. So I do the same to the top up here. I add my 0 on the top of my fraction, and those are considered equivalent. Okay, so we write an equals sign on this one here. Okay, let's move on to D. So in D here, we have 550 thousandths. Or, remember, we could say that as 55 hundredths. Or, over here, we have 56 hundredths. So 56 hundredths is larger. So my mouth points to the 56 here. Okay, for E, we have 83 hundredths. Or we have 803 thousandths. Okay, what is going to be larger? Okay, so I have 83 over 100. And over here, I have 803 over 1,000. Okay, so over here, to get from 100 to 1,000, I've added a 0. Okay, so over here, if I did the same, for my 83 here, if I were to move over here, I would want to add a 0. Well, 830 is larger than 803. So that means that 83 hundredths is greater than 803 thousandths. So my mouth here is pointing towards the 83 hundredths. And my last one here, 0.08 or 8 hundredths versus 8 tenths. Okay, let's try this out again. So I have 8 hundredths or 80 hundredths. Which is larger? Obviously the 80. So my mouth here is pointed to the 80 hundredths. These last questions here ask you to order the numbers from greatest to least. Okay, so these are whole numbers here. So I'm just basically looking to see which has the greatest value, okay, or which one has more place values. Okay, so I know it's going to be one of these two because we get all the way up into the hundred thousands. So let's see, 445 hundred thousand or 450 hundred thousand. Let's see. Well, we know 450 is greater, so 450,333. Once I've used it, I cross it out. Okay, my next one is 445,301. Cross it out. Then I go to the 34,508. Lastly, 22,098. Okay, my last question here, we have our decimals. Okay, so always start before the decimal with the value before the decimal and figure out which is the greatest value. Okay, so I see numbers here. I have 32, 34, 30. What's greater? Okay, we know 34 is greater, so that's going to be my first one, and I cross it out when I use it. Okay, my next greatest value before the decimal is 32, so 32.2. And my last greatest value before, I have a 30 before the decimal, and then lastly I have a 2 before the decimal. Now some of you might have got confused because this number looks longer than all the other numbers. Okay, but however, I still only have 2 wholes. So this one has to go behind 30 whole numbers and 32 whole numbers and 34 whole numbers. Okay, because 2 is smaller than those other values. Okay, lastly, now that I've used up all of the greater numbers before the decimal, then I look to behind the decimal. Okay, 0.234 is the one that has the smallest value. Okay, I hope this video was helpful. Make sure you review it this weekend to help you study for your test. Your test will be Monday.